Hey everybody, MS Farzan here, and I am thrilled to introduce you to the Entromancy Character Creator and Entromancy Struct. These are two little apps that I've made to interface with and help you to get Entromancy games up and running. And I'm going to walk you through how they work. And I should also note that the links to these will be in the description of this video, as well as the links to GitHub, the repositories for each of these, if you're interested in seeing how the code works and learn a little about how Godot works. I've used the Godot engine to make both of these apps, also with a theme adapted from a person named Azagaya from itch.io. I've adapted that theme for the UI that you see here, and that you'll also see for Struct. And it's been a really interesting journey and experience working with Godot to create these two little apps. I'll talk a little bit more about them towards the end of the video in case you're not interested at all in the actual programming and development of this of these apps. But in any case, let's start just by looking at the layout for the Entromancy Character Creator. This is made for use with Entromancy, a cyberpunk fantasy RPG, and also the expansion content in the Orchite Age. And it allows you to track your name. Let's say our name is Iskander, and the age, up to 250 years old if you're a high Auric, how many missions you've completed, whether you're a dwarf, a gnome, high Auric, or troll, or what have you. And then the cool part is there's some conditional logic. So you see all of your ability scores and your skills and your combat stats. They're all laid out here, but that's based on your class. So if I choose, for example, to be a knight agent, that will autofill all of my different skills and ability scores and combat stats so that I don't have to keep track of them via pen and paper. And I should also mention that if you are using any of the content from the Orchite Age expansion content, then you'll have to purchase that content. Otherwise, a lot of this is already covered in the free quick start guide that you can find on the Entromancy website or DriveThruRPG. And so I've got all my stats laid out, and I can just click the roll button, and it will automatically roll a d20 for me and add the modifier. So that'll be a strength plus 4 to get me to a 16. And the same works also for my initiative or my melee attack, or the damage modifiers, which are all changed when, like, let's say I change my class to a Vanguard. That will easily and automatically change my hit points and number of Ceridium, the resource that I need to cast my spells and work cybernetics and etc. And yeah, I can just roll, and then I don't need to carry dice with me, and this all just works. And I'm using the web app right now. There's a desktop version that is available to download through DriveThruRPG, which I'll also link in the description if you want to check it out. And then if I want to track my equipment and cybernetics, I have little text fields here that I can edit and just add them manually so I can keep track of them. And if I don't want to carry my books around, I can always just go to the Entromancy Compendium app, which there's another video about this on my my channel. So like I can check out let's see, my equipment and look at my faction gear, for example, or my cybernetics, and then I'll remember how to do this. And this website is mobile responsive. The other two are not quite. Like, this isn't very optimized for mobile. And based on my, if you know the game at all, based on my class selection, that'll also change my archetype. So like if I choose to be a Terramancer, I can also choose to be an Arcane Pitcher or a Nature's Harbinger. I can list my feats and my talents and spells. And finally, I can change my Destiny. That's kind of like a prestige class in Entromancy, and track my faction points using these little value things. And what else can I tell you? Oh, the best thing about this too is I can change from light mode to dark mode with a single click. That's I probably should have led with that because I think that looks pretty cool. And so this is like if you're playing and you're not the GM, you're acting as a player or you're running an NPC, for example. Struct is a different beast entirely. Struct is an innovative system for running GM-less or GM-light Entromancy games. So if you want to run an Entromancy game, but you don't want to put the time in to like design a bunch of encounters or figure out what the mission objective is or what NPCs you're going to run into or what monsters, what have you. This Struct basically does that work for you. It was introduced in Module 2 of the expansion content of the Orachite Age, and so that would be required for purchase to understand how Struct works. But it's not so complicated. It basically just distills the entire role-playing game experience into a number of dice rolls. So let me lead with the light mode, dark mode here. Maybe we'll check out dark mode for the rest of this video. Struct, so we've kind of abstracted what it feels like to play a role-playing game into a series of dice rolls that we call thematically interfaces, and you're going to implement one of these interfaces to decide what happens in a game. Even if you're just playing by yourself or with a number of other players, you don't have a GM, you can use Struct to guide how this system, how your game should play out by using this system. It was super inspired, as you'll read in Module 2, it was super inspired by Ironsworn and the way that they handle GM-less or GM-light role-playing. And so my global objective is kind of like the top level concern in any game. What am I doing in this game? And in the base game, if I roll, I'll find that a number of different options like smash and grab. A local kingpin is in possession of a Ceridium artifact that you've been tasked with liberating by any means necessary. So that gives me a thread to figure out how my game is going to work. If I'm playing in any of the expansion content, like in Module 3 and Module 4, the present past, I can roll global objectives based on that content. The next, I'll choose a faction objective to see, depending on what faction I'm using, what is the sub-objective for the mission that I'm doing based on that faction, as there's a sort of internecine faction politicking aspect of the Entromancy game. So scrape nets, your faction's network has been compromised, and it won't take time for the vultures to circle. Reestablish control by making allies that can help or fix the program yourself. So, depending on the faction that I'm using, or if I'm using the expansion content, I can roll a faction objective. Then the next level is see how many faction points I'm going to get for completing my faction objective. I'll gain 1d4 faction points for the relevant faction by completing the task, but I'll lose 1d4 faction points with all other factions. So you're going to have to decide, do you want to make friends or enemies or frenemies, or how's that going to work for you? Then I'll just determine like what location do I want to go to based on the Entromancy role-playing game set in 2076 San Francisco. What encounter am I going to have? Is it going to be a skill check? Is it going to be a combat check? And if it's a skill check, I'm going to roll the skill difficulty and see what the difficulty class or what number I have to hit to overcome that skill encounter. And what happens? What happens if I succeed at the roll? Well, perhaps I have no additional positive outcome, or perhaps I discover a piece of gear. If I fail, maybe I fail, but I'm able to try again, or maybe there's an unforeseen negative consequence. So if you're, for example, running this as a GM, you don't want to do the work to figure out what happens if they fail. Well, this will what happens if a skill check fails, this will determine for you. Maybe I run into an NPC as one of the encounters that I roll. Which NPC am I going to run into? And then I can cross-reference this with the where are we looking? The key characters here on the Entromancy Compendium app or in the role-playing manual, and see what that person does. What's the disposition of the NPC that I run into? Are they allied? Are they neutral? Are they mad at me? What's the combat difficulty if I run into a combat encounter? And this will say, okay, 2 light threat adversaries per player or 1 medium threat adversary per player. And this references the monster section or the adversary section of the core rulebook, which is the only thing that's not included in the Entromancy Compendium app. And so if I implement the encounters interface and it says that I need to do combat, then I check what the combat difficulty is, and then that kind of waterfalls into, let's say I need a light adversary, I'll just roll that and it'll say, okay, you need to put out you need to fight an auto dock drone, or if it's a medium threat, it's an industrial drone. A high threat example could be a Kabbalist Entromancer, or a deadly threat, well, you're going to have to fight the Shadow Dragon. Sorry about that. And then finally, there are two interfaces from the Orchid Age expansion content, the Red Hat Patrols, where you'll have to roll that specifically for, I think this is in Module 3 and Module 4. There are time rifts. And so this will roll this for you. So I think it's pretty cool because it obviates the need for you to have like a lot of pen and paper stuff. Like maybe you have a couple of dice rolling around, but by and large, you can run your Entromancy game using Struct, and you can keep track of your characters using the character creator. There's some certain limitations to these apps too that definitely recognize. Like one, there are only web and desktop versions right now. There's not a mobile version or anything for iOS. Both versions are not mobile optimized. You can kind of get by using Struct on a cell phone or perhaps like an iPad, because it's built with an aspect ratio that should work on those platforms. The character creator, not so much. The text will be too small. And if you download either of these versions, you will have to make sure that the PCK file is in the same folder as the executable. But you can also just access the web versions and be done with it. Now moving into the coding portion of it. So these are both built, as I mentioned, in the Godot engine. And I chose Godot because I tried a number of different game engines and frameworks on for size to see what would work best. The thing that I really like about Godot is that you're able to make UI-rich apps with it and lay them out with a what you see is what you get editor without doing everything through code, which is what I was trying to do first with what have I used? I tried to make something, so the Entromancy Compendium app is made in Vue.js, and it's fine. It's just I don't love working in HTML and CSS for creating apps. I like being able to just move things around with my mouse and not have to worry about building the skeleton using HTML. And I also tried using Monogame, Raylib, and just a bunch of other stuff that we don't really need to get into. And I found that it was just easy to see everything as I was laying it out. And I was able to find this really cool pixel art theme for Godot 3.x from itch.io made by Azagaya. And so I adapted it to make it look more in line with Entromancy. Similarly, I'm familiar with C#, so all the scripting for the roles and everything is done in C# rather than Godot's proprietary coding language, which is called GDScript. And I found it to be pretty seamless with using Visual Studio. And it's entirely open source. You can download it and tinker with it at your leisure using the repo projects that I've included in the description for this video. The one thing that I say is, although Godot's not perfect, it's free to use. I found that the documentation is a little bit hit or miss. Like I've had to work a lot on my own and import a lot of my knowledge from Unity and just C# in general to kind of like bully my way through a lot of the things. But even though the documentation isn't necessarily the best, or it privileges, for example, Godot 4 is out right now. I use Godot 3.5 because it's just more stable, and it's had a lot more battle testing, and the feature set is pretty rich compared to what you find in Godot 4, at least right now at the timing of this video. But if you're using Visual Studio, for example, there's so much IntelliSense and auto-completion that is available for the Godot SDK and API that I found it pretty easy to navigate. And if you have some familiarity with the API for Godot, it's kind of easy to poke through the GD script documentation and figure out, like, port it over to what would it look like in C# once you get familiar with the base classes. And so I found that to be pretty seamless. Anyway, poke through the code and see if it's helpful for you. And I hope that it has. And if it has, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more content. And let me know what you think about the app. And if you have any feedback or suggestions, feel free to comment or join us on Discord, and we'll hopefully see you soon.